What's up guys, and welcome back to Tech Plant. Today I'm going to show you how to make a cutting without actually taking a cutting through the magic of air layering. Let's check it out. Alright, so here is my Monstera, and it is huge. I mean, it's growing out of control. So this time we're going to propagate it, but we're going to do a slightly safer way, and that's through air layering. So you can actually root and propagate a cutting before making it a cutting. So the first step you're going to do is identify which vine you're going to try and air layer, and then you're going to try and identify the nodes. Now some of you might have longer stems with like more distance in between the nodes, but mine here is pretty condensed, so I'm going to try and get two of them in one rooting. That way I have two anchor points. So to prepare that, I'm going to chop off one of these giant aerial roots because I don't want to stuff that into the bag, which we're going to be using next. So one of the main concepts of this is basically to make a situation for the roots to want to grow into, so that way you can kind of get your aerial roots to grow into a substrate, and then once they're formed you can kind of chop the cutting off. So for me, I'm going to use sphagnum moss, but a lot of people get away with using perlite or a perlite sphagnum moss mix. This is kind of the hard part that's going to change based on what you guys choose to use and what your nodes and just how your plant is growing. So I'm going to take the bag and kind of cut down the sides because I'm going to need a way to sort of get the cutting down and touching the substrate. I want those aerial roots to be in contact with the sphagnum moss. So I'm going to use the plastic bag and cut down the sides down to the sphagnum moss, so that way I can use the rest of the plastic to sort of wrap around the top of the vine. Once you get the substrate kind of pressed up against the roots and nodes really well, now you're going to try and find any way to really secure the bag tightly to the branch. So I'm going to use some like twisty ties or little metal ties and some rubber bands and rope. Really anything you can do to make sure the substrate is pressed up against the nodes, because this is what's going to allow the roots to grow into it. It's hard to see from this footage, but beneath the actual vine there is no plastic. I'm only wrapping the plastic around the outside, so that way the vine is touching the substrate. That is the most important part. You can kind of see it now a little better that it's kind of wrapped around and tied and secured in multiple ways, and I left a little bit of the top open so I have a way to add additional water as it dries out. Now, you can't see it yet, but I found that it was a little too wet at times, so you might be better off poking some holes in the plastic just so some air or oxygen can get in there and it doesn't get too damp. I started this one on March 1st, and now it is March 26th, and it has been about a month. You can see plenty of the roots have actually grown out to the outer plastic, so you can actually see them now. There were plenty of roots growing like before this point obviously, but I couldn't easily see them through this sphagnum moss, so that's why I did not film anything between the start and now. It is now April 4th and about 10 days have passed, and you can see I let it go a little too long. The roots are starting to turn brownish black and they are starting to rot, so it did in fact stay a little too moist and there should have been some more holes poked in the plastic. But all is not lost and we can definitely save this cutting. Well, this air layered Monstera. So let's carefully get this plastic off and make sure we don't damage anything else on our way out. After kind of clearing away the sphagnum moss, you can see that these bigger roots that we saw just only 10 days ago where they look perfectly white and nice have now kind of turned discolored and they're getting a little weird. I'm going to cut off anything that looks even remotely rotten just to prevent it from spreading. Luckily though, because we did kind of press up this sphagnum moss against multiple nodes, we do have multiple areas where there are roots coming out, and a lot of those did not rot, so we still have a good cutting. So when we cut this thing off, it'll be totally fine to throw in some soil because it has roots in multiple areas, so we don't have to worry too much about that little bit of root rot that we did see. Now if yours were a little worse looking, you can have no fear because you can just chop these roots off and try it again after you let it kind of callus over. So this is a great way because if you screw up a little bit, you can just chop the rotting roots off and just leave the plant and not do anything, and it will totally be fine. However, I'm confident enough in the roots that we do have that are good and the removal of the rotted roots that we can sever this from the main plant and actually pot it up. So when you go to cut your cutting off, make sure you don't catch any of the roots while you're cutting, and be very careful you don't break anything, but just make one nice clean cut below all the roots and you should be good. Here's some footage from some like previous cuts that I've made. The cuts will callus over just fine on the mother plant and new growth will start, so you don't have to fear like ruining your plant because it's going to put out new growth points and you'll have a nice bushy plant again in no time. Now that we have our plant severed from the mother plant, we can just pot it up because again, we did the air layering so we could develop our roots without severing it, so it's really awesome and safe. So now we can just put it right into the soil. For aeroids, I usually use kind of like a charcoal woody mix. So as far as the soil mixture that I'm using, it's kind of one I've just kind of made. A lot of people do this. It's usually like a pretty woody mixture, lots of wood chips, lots of bark. I use a little bit of sphagnum moss, just things to allow the soil to really breathe because these things don't sit in like heavy compost. Honestly, you could probably emulate most like orchid mediums that you can buy. So if you buy like orchid mix, that stuff's usually pretty good for stuff like this. I mean, a lot of people grow them in just like clay pebbles, just something that gets a lot of air. And once you've got it potted up, that's about it. I mean, that takes care of everything. You safely propagated your cutting before even making a cutting. So this is a really cool way to do so. Well guys, that pretty much sums up this video. It's actually not too complicated to do this. I think it's a pretty safe approach because that way you can't kind of lose your cutting because you're going to root it before you actually cut it from the plant. Hope you guys learned something from this. And as always, may your plants grow strong and healthy. I'll see you next time.